Hi, it's Andy Hoffman again, Media Director for Miles Franklin Precious Metals. Today I'm excited to have Dan Ameduri as my guest. Dan and I go back a long ways from when he was both the producer and narrator of the fine videos published by the National Inflation Association in 2009 and 2010. For the past 3 years, he has operated his own business, Future Money Trends, focusing on investor relations services to the mining industry, and still publishing his trademark, at times viral videos. Dan and I have been friends since a chance meeting at the San Francisco Mining Conference in 2010, which we will discuss shortly. And in my view, he is one of the most dedicated real money advocates in the world. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great. That was a very warm and welcomed introduction. Thank you very much, Andy.
Well, well
A
deserved.
pleasure knowing you as well.
Well deserved. Well deserved. Now, as always, we're going to start by talking about some of the week's top stories, and then we'll move on to some broader topics. Of course, we have to start with what's going on in the COMEX. It's been well documented that the December delivery period, which is typically the largest monthly period of the year, is well underway. What happens is the contract actually closes on December 31st. So until then, we're not going to know exactly what the change is going to be in the COMEX inventories. But as of now, I think there's about 450,000 ounces standing for delivery and another 200,000 worth contracts still open. So theoretically, we should see about 650,000 ounces stand for delivery, and there's only about 720,000 ounces of registered inventory. So, I mean, at this point, there's almost no registered inventory left, assuming a big inventory increase doesn't come in the next 2 weeks. So let's watch that carefully. Also, the COMEX commercial shorts, they once again have been covering dramatically. In the past 4 weeks, they've almost got it back to the levels we were at in late June when the sector bottomed, when for the first time in the entire bull market, both gold and silver the commercials almost went net long, and that's where we stand right now. Also during the week, we saw the budget deal, which I wrote a piece called "Budget Deal is a Complete Farce." And for those who didn't, aren't aware of what that is, remember the October 17th deal, which ended the government shutdown, and it put a new deadline that there had to be a new budget by December 13th, or else we'd have a government shutdown in January. Well, they did a deal, all right, but this deal is such a travesty of accounting shenanigans. One of the biggest embarrassments I've ever seen for even our Congress, as they're actually going to increase spending by 5%, but claim that they're going to save a whopping $20 billion a year of deficit. And this is on $1 trillion deficit over a decade, because they're going to back end weight it with some silly taxes, which they're not even going to call taxes. Now, Daniel, I'm sure you've read about this budget deal per se. What's your view on it, or is there any other view than what I just gave?
Yeah, nothing else than what you just gave, but it is so frustrating and it's very discouraging because they keep this keeps going on. They keep coming up with these budget deals and they'll come out and say we're going to cut 23 billion or 60 billion, and of course it's over 10 years and none of the cuts actually happen until like the 5th through the 10th year. And of course, as you just noted, it doesn't really matter because just like the sequester cuts, these automatic cuts that were, that got a budget deal a year or two ago done. But of course, they just change it. It really doesn't matter. You get, I think Ron Paul says it best. He's like, you get all the spending, but you don't get any of the cuts. They'll just change that later on. So I think just as somebody who lives in the country, who would like to see the country at least, change and try to take a step in the right direction. It's so damn hopeless when you see what they're doing. There's just no credible fix and nobody's serious. And that's scary because essentially you have a 5-year-old at the steering wheel and we're going off a cliff.
Yeah, well, just like fiat currency itself is a Ponzi scheme, so is big government. It must keep growing larger. And people, we talk about this, the Fed is going to meet Wednesday to decide if they should taper a tiny bit of this scheme. But the fact is, they can never taper. They're talking about the unemployment rate going down because the labor participation rate is going down. But by the way, on December 28th, part of this budget deal was they are not going to extend unemployment benefits to millions of people. So in just 2 weeks from now, 1.3 million people are going to leave the labor force, and that's going to potentially drop the unemployment rate down to close to 6.5% without a single job coming online. So it's very scary. Whether the Fed does, politically is forced to say, yes, we'll taper 10 billion of our 85 billion is immaterial. Frankly, I don't think they will with, Benny's reign ending and Janet Yellen starting. But even if they did, it's just a matter of talk at this point, which will ultimately be reversed. Now that the Chinese, for instance, are no longer going to be acquiring currency reserves, which means there's no way that anyone's going to be buying treasuries other than the Fed. And one other thing I noted this week, and I wrote a piece on it called "Dying U.S. Hegemony." This Pew poll just came out that said 53% of the American population believe the U.S. is standing in the world, has declined from a decade ago, which is the largest percentage in this poll in the 39 years that they've been doing the poll. And I think that's very symbolic. I mean, Daniel, is there any way that anyone could believe the U.S. hegemony has anywhere to go but down?
No, I mean, I just can't imagine somebody actually thinking that the best days are ahead of us with we're approaching $18 trillion in official national debt. Our young people can't get jobs. They're loaded with 25, 35,000 on average. I mean, some people have ridiculous amounts of college student loan debt. I just don't see it. I was reading a poll myself the other day that I quoted in an article about ABC and Washington Post had a poll that 80% of citizens in the U.S. are frustrated and angry with the government, and kind of just reminded me of this whole thing that happened in Singapore last weekend, where this very peaceful, prosperous city state had some riots break out, and it's just like it's the middle class is being squeezed. The wealthy, not the uber wealthy, but the people who they call wealthy, who make their family of three or four, and they have 150 to 200 grand. And then the poor, I mean, everybody's upset. Everybody has a grievance right now against the government. And meanwhile, our government is, I just read something on the Drudge where we almost had a collision with a Chinese warship. So here, America, is basically falling apart at the seams domestically, and we're sitting over there making trouble with somebody we just don't need to be making trouble with.
Well, the Singapore thing, is very interesting. There was actually a Sovereign Man article about those riots in the type of place you wouldn't expect them. And the real cause of all these things is we've been writing here at the blog all year is exported inflation from the Federal Reserve. There's no coincidence about the fact that since the Fed really upped its money printing back at the end of 2011, which was at the time really just trying to save Europe, um, you know, that's when you've seen inflation really take off around the world. The average currency is down 20% against the dollar since that time, which is ironic because it's the dollar that's being hyperinflated. But this is what happens. The reserve currency initially exports that inflation overseas. So now you're seeing places from as like Egypt, where people would expect those things to happen, to places like Brazil or Turkey, and of course, as you mentioned, Singapore, which is now being touted as like the greatest place on earth, having similar issues. I mean, social problems arise from financial issues. And, as we were just talking about in America, where, by the way, not just 1.3 million people are coming off the unemployment benefit payrolls in December, but by the end of next year, it's going to be 4 million people. So the same kind of things can happen everywhere, and it's a direct it's a direct correlation between U.S. hegemony and the amount of unhappy people around the world.
Yeah, because we know the government numbers are so bogus, a lot of times you just kind of use your own indicators when you're traveling or just people in your own life. But, I know from my own life that I know a lot of young people, including like a nephew, some friends, and cousins. These are young people, good people. They're in their 20s, even up to 30 years old, and they're still stuck at, Party City and Subway and KFC. That they've gone to college, they've done what they need to do, but there isn't much out there for them. And I think that is actually probably the scariest thing, because when the youth is just kind of stuck and frustrated, that's when you'll have civil unrest.
Yes, absolutely. I had a little technical difficulty here. By the way, and the people who are working at KFC, look, just last week we had people in 130 cities in America protesting what they call the war against poverty wages. So if you can even get those hours, that's what you get for them. And of course, then you have the corporations that, because of Obamacare, are cutting hours down to just what would be considered part-time, so that they can't even get unemployment benefits. And that's just one sector of what you're seeing in the labor force here. As you said, anecdotally is what is the way to look at the world, not through the eyes of what you're told by the mainstream media.
Yeah, and you just touched on Obamacare. I it's kind of funny because both of us are in a situation where we report things, and here I am reporting these things about Obamacare, and I go out to my mailbox, and there it is, Blue Shield canceling my insurance due to the Affordable Care Act because my coverage no longer qualifies. Well, that's very scary. My wife is about 23 weeks pregnant, so what's going to happen? And so much uncertainty causes unnecessary stress to your life. I call the insurance people. It's going to end up, being about an extra $150 to $200 a month for me to keep some coverage or have some different coverage. But then I'm in a situation where I'm getting a lot of coverage I don't need. Just for example, I know you didn't. I know you didn't plan on going to Obamacare, but just to tell people my own life, now I have to get my children dental care. My dentist is like, look, the worst case scenario, you're going to pay like $150 a year. Well, now I've got to pay like $450 a year in dental insurance for each child. So Obamacare has really affected people's life, and this again goes to like the poor are screwed, the upper average middle class, wealthier middle class is screwed, and everybody's being squeezed right now. And gosh, I tell you, that sovereign man article you're talking about, I saw it on Zero Hedge, and it wouldn't take much for people to really vent their anger, and that's kind of one thing that I'm a little concerned about right now.
Yeah, my last comment on Obamacare, as you said, I wouldn't be using, but the fact is, I don't know if I'll be using it. Most people don't have the slightest clue, including the congressman who passed it and admitted they didn't read it. Have any clue what it means. Look at all the things that come out. Oh, you're not getting coverage anymore? Well, Obama said you are gonna get coverage, and all of a sudden you get the letter. I got a letter yesterday from Golden Rule, my insurance, and it said policy information, and my first thought was, are they canceling my plan? And I just have a new daughter myself. So the point is, no one has any clue, but this is how governments, destroy lives, because all this is going to do is increase the costs of the average person, reduce the amount of health care and the timeliness of it, and bring us down, from what was once the greatest healthcare system in the world. So anyway, now we're going to move on to, let's call them happier topics. because Solely because they're more near and dear to our lives. As noted in the introduction, Dan provides investor relations to junior mining companies, just as I did from 2006 until joining Miles Franklin in 2011. Generally speaking, junior miners have served as an industry incubator of sorts. In other words, they find the deposits that eventually get developed by the majors. However, over the past decade, there have been precious few significant discoveries in care of surging mining costs, even fewer major developments. For some time, my contention has been that the mining industry has been slowly starved of capital by years of cartel attacks, and now that gold and silver prices are below the all-in cost of production, I anticipate production to at best stagnate and at worst collapse in the coming 2 to 3 years. Daniel, you just attended the San Francisco Mining Conference, which is perhaps the largest annual event here in the States. Tell us what kind of investor interest you saw there, and the finances of such, and what the situation is going forward. You think for the junior mining industry?
Well, you and I could have safely bowled down the aisles. It was rather shocking as somebody who's been going to them for several years now. Last year, it was kind of interesting because though the mining stocks have been in a bear market for some time, uh, last year there was actually over 200 booths there, and they had to actually get like an extra room. It was probably the biggest show they've ever had. And this year you showed up and there was only 61 booths. Only 61 mining companies came as opposed to over 200 last year. And then of course the big noticeable thing was the attendance was way down. And they had gone all out this show. They even had Ron Paul as the keynote speaker, of course, to try to draw a good crowd in. And when Ron Paul was speaking, there, he did have every seat filled up, but otherwise it was very spotty. There wasn't very many people there. Just not too much engagement or involvement like I've seen in the past years. I mean, I remember last year they even had booths set up in the hallways when you were going down to the exhibit floor. And this year it was just like everybody was in this small room. It was kind of sad in a way because so many of these guys have just been beaten down. They were saying, I talked to one of them. He was like, the show actually comped his booth to get him to go. It was actually a company that I can't remember the name and probably don't want to mention it now because I don't want somebody to accidentally buy it. But I remember they worked for your old IR firm or worked with them. But it was a company that they were like, yeah, the minerals show just invited us to come for free. I don't know how many more there were like that just got invited to come for free because they were trying to, I guess, present that they had something to offer as far as a show. But certainly, it was very bleak, very spotty, and very depressed down there. And I talked to Rick Rule, and he was actually saying that San Francisco was the best one he'd been to in a while, and that he was in one in Australia, and he said it was absolute depression down there. So certainly these juniors are being squeezed. Hopefully, it means that the scammers are being cleared away, though they're still out there, and of course the mining industry in general, it's you it's a long shot if you ever find anything, and then it's even an even greater long shot if you actually produce something.
Mhm.
So, but hopefully the good companies are sticking around. But it's a horrible business model for the producers because your mine is depleting, and you're selling it for what nothing, or you're losing money, or they're bragging that they're pulling it out for 1950 and silver's at 19. I mean, look, it's a real bad situation for these miners.
Well, I recall, I think my first conference was back in, I'm going to say 2006 at PDAC in Toronto, which is the largest in the world. And, even as recently as I'd say in 2010, there was as many as 10,000 people there. Of course, that's a much bigger, broader conference. That's where you see vendors of all sorts, from mining contractors to truckers to caterers. There's everything imaginable. Whereas San Francisco is more of a pure mining industry expo. You just go and see the companies and their managements. And I remember back in early 2008, just to show what the cartel has done to the industry. I was at PDAC. This was in March 2008, so we're before the financial crisis, and I remember that's when silver first hit $20 an ounce, and it actually hit at the conference, followed by its characteristic plunge because they always smash gold and silver at these conferences. But I remember the day it hit 20, and think about this. This is before the financial crisis. 5.5 years ago, it hit $20, and since that time, the world has printed probably 20 plus trillion dollars. The unemployment rate is much worse. Inflation is much worse. The money, I mean, everything is much worse. And yet the price of silver today is still sitting around $20. That's what has killed the junior mining industry. And I remember writing a year ago of half of all the juniors having less than a half million of cash. Well, if you're telling me that only 60 companies showed up, well, then that's proving that the industry really is whittling itself out. And, without the capital, I mean, I'm not sure where they're going to get the capital, but we need prices to go much, much higher, or else there's going to be no discoveries in this business. I mean, am I missing something?
No, and I was talking to a few of them about that, and they were saying that there was another company I never heard of, and then Sprott, and they were like, the Canadian banks, they're completely out, they're gone. Private money's hard to get. Asians aren't funding these things anymore. And they're like, you're down to Sprott. And according to this guy, I don't know the industry. I mean, I have a big respect for Rick Rule and Eric Sprott. But the mining companies are like comparing Sprott loans to mafia loans. So I mean, even if they did get money from Sprott or another fund, it's not the best terms. They're going to get squeezed big time.
Well, the terms were terrible 5 years ago. I mean, when I was working for these companies, where, in my view, the Canadian banks were just as much at fault for driving these companies to these deals with these horrible warrants, and that was when you could actually get some money. So now, my view is this: of course, is always going to be the best companies are going to rise to the top and somehow manage to survive, and of course, someone will find something at some point that'll be worth developing and being big for investors. But if we're talking about the big picture of gold and silver prices right now, I doubt it's ever been more dire as far as a supply outlook from what has been discovered in recent years and the amount of capital that's in the industry. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is how you utilize the internet to spread your messages of asset protection amidst an obviously upcoming historic crisis. I mean, in my view, the day the dollar died is one of the best videos I've seen. I mean, it's had an astonishing 2.2 million paid views already, at least on just the one YouTube I looked at. And there's
Yeah.
many others. The college conspiracy, the debt, what do you call it, debt nation or hyperinflation nation. So between your work with NIA and Future Money Trends, you've undoubtedly produced more viral videos on the topic of precious metals than anyone alive. What impact do you think such videos can have on our cause, and do you plan on producing additional ones in the future?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're working on some new gold and silver ones actually that are hopefully going to come out in early January. But it's definitely a passion of mine. It's very fun researching them and trying to find those, aha moments or things that you didn't know, because that's what really is going to make a video viral. It's a combination of things. It's the presentation. We do have the theatrical music. We do have the good content. It's kind of a combination of both. Really giving people that kind of movie trailer type feel, but at the same point in time, they're getting something out of it. It's new information, or it's somebody taking information that's out there, but kind of putting it together for everybody. So yeah, no, it's definitely silver has been our biggest success when it comes to educating people about that. Without a doubt, we've helped so many people get involved in buying silver and understanding that the true supply out there is dwindling. There's less above ground available silver than there is gold, and we haven't touched on too much on the COMEX, but we actually do have some pretty cool videos that we're hoping to release next year that will actually be like the day the dollar died, but it'll be a scenario of a COMEX default. So hopefully that'll come out in the next 3 or 4 months here. But we're working on a lot more projects in the gold and silver area, and we just thoroughly enjoy doing them. They're obviously the best videos we put out. It was a lot more fun when we put out a video on silver and it would go up $3 or $4 or $10 from the time we put it out. So it's been pretty rough lately. They don't catch on as like they used to, but still, it's something that I'm passionate about, and I'm very proud of all the videos that we put out, and I can't even imagine how many thousands of people bought silver because of these videos.
Well, the reason they're not catching on as they used to is obviously because of price, because the large majority of people, I know, of course, your videos are going out to the whole world, but the large majority of people that watch them are in the Western world who are still basically price followers. They just think of gold and silver or Bitcoin or anything for that matter, or Tesla shares as investments. And when they go up, they're interested. When they go up, they're not. I mean, all you have to do is look at our blog postings, our little chat room. Gold went up a couple of days this week, and all of a sudden there's a ton of chat. Then it gets hit yesterday, and it gets quiet again. So the fact is, what's going on in the Eastern world is unprecedented right now. We're seeing record demand. China, India, you name it, everywhere. Heck, even silver eagle and silver maple demand at the Canadian and U.S. mints are at record levels, obviously being bought by Easterners, given what we've been seeing here in the bullion business. But it will catch on again. First, the prices will go up, and people will watch us because they're going up, and then eventually, whether they're forced by as you say, an aha moment, or just because the education, they realize things are hopeless, they'll start to realize that it's not an investment; it's the way to preserve your net worth. And back now, that'll bring us to our last topic. Now, in the coming years or even months, I expect an accelerating downward spiral of global economic activity and purchasing power. And now that the Chinese have clearly made it known that they seek a de-Americanized world, as evidenced by the PBOC's last week announcement that it no longer intends to acquire foreign currency reserves, I think it's inevitable that this change is coming. I mean, Dan, how do you see the global economic landscape morphing in 2014? And what areas politically, financially, or otherwise do you foresee as most vulnerable to catalyzing the next crisis?
Oh man, the most vulnerable. That's a rough one. Well, I mean, you've got Europe in recession, and China basically is in a huge bubble, and I think it's goes back to the U.S. because cyclically even if there was a normal recovery or something, every 7 or 8 years you kind of go into recession. So, I really think it's 2014 is the acknowledgement where people are going to really see that the U.S. is not in a recovery. Maybe we'll go into an official recession, but I really feel like, I mean, and I know you agree, we are living in a depression. This is a modern day depression. The breadline is the 48 million people on food stamps, and the unemployment is really there, and the underemployment is what's compensating these fake numbers. But I really feel like 2014 is going to be the year that the U.S. is acknowledged that it is in recession, and I think that will lead to a crisis in the stock market, most likely, just because so many people have been buying the stocks, basically just because, like what you were saying, other people are buying stocks and they're going up, and people are feeling good. But I mean, as you know, it's probably the top 10% that are buying stocks. No one else is. But still, once that stock market collapses, that is the only thing. That's the only evidence that they can point to and say, look, the recovery is happening. That's the only thing they got. So once the stock market starts to crash, and it is just kind of built on air, I think that'll be the kicker for the next crisis.
Yeah, well, those food stamps have to continue to spend, or else we'll have real bread lines, except there'll be no bread. And as for the stock market, I've taken a different take because I'm not clear in my mind whether the stock market will quote crash in nominal term in real terms, or simply hyperinflate. I mean, the perfect example is what's going on in Venezuela, where they have a 50% increase in their CPI this year. It's clearly much more than that. They do have bread lines there. They have shortages of everything from toilet paper to milk. The government is taking over in a communist type form, but the stock market's up 500%, and that's what happened in Weimar Germany. It's what happened in Zimbabwe, where initially the gains, which were fueled by money printing, were real until all of a sudden they became nominal. So I'm not even sure what direction the stock market will go. But as you said, retail participation is at record lows. There are a few stragglers jumping on here at the end of this run, getting excited about the Twitters and Facebooks trading at .com valuations.
Yeah.
But the fact is, the real wealth in the country is gone for the average person. Only that 0.1% is making money. And then, of course, you have this whole Fed thing with QE and tapering. I mean, tapering, I'm not talking about tapering where they cut 5 billion out of 85 billion. But I'm talking about the ability to stop is non-existent, because low interest rates, is what gives any impression of recovery. And there isn't much impression to start with. So I think that the acknowledgement that tapering is impossible is upon us, in the next 12 months. And I think that's going to cause the things that we're talking about here, whether the market crashes or whether it hyperinflates and the standard of living crashes is I'm not sure. As far as me, I mean, I just wrote another piece about India today. I see Greece is on the verge of collapse as well. I mean, something is going to give at some time soon. You look at Japan, where the yen is hitting new lows as we speak. Something's got to give, and it may well be the COMEX in 2014. I guess we just wait and see. Well, anyway, I appreciate your coming on the show this week, Daniel. It's very informative. Why don't you let people know about your company and how to get in touch with you, your website, etc.?
Well, thanks very much for having me. If you go to futuremoneytrends.com, every Wednesday I put out a weekly wealth digest. On Fridays, we talk about basically usually the resource sector, but other money trends with the top experts. Obviously, we have you as a guest many times, and we usually do those interviews on Friday and release them on our YouTube channel, Vision Victory, and then we usually email them out on Saturdays. And then, as you said, we also profile opportunity companies. Some are paid and compensated picks, and some are free or unbiased picks. And we also have a paid membership that we started and launched, and it basically has more in-depth research on trends and extra income ideas, because I'm all about surviving and thriving. So we've come up with 6 or 7 extra income ideas so far, and these are not ideas that are like life-changing where you're going to become a millionaire, but they're ideas that will realistically help you make a few hundred extra dollars a month, and they're easy to do, and anyone can do them, and that's the most important thing, because again, we're trying to survive and thrive during this depression.
All right. Well, thanks again, Daniel. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Andy. You have a good holiday, and send me the podcast.